Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Rune from Rune'sGuild, and this is another episode of RPG Horror Stories. In fact, this is a second episode of the Ballad of Blob, or whatever the heck I called it the first time, Saga, I don't know. Anyways, this is the second episode of that. If you haven't seen part one, go watch it. It'll be linked somewhere. And if you have watched it, stick around because we are about to go ahead and roll the post. In this episode, an even more powerful metagamer sets his sights on Blob. I'll call this guy Scion, as he was playing a telekinetic superhero who aspired to become the strongest sidekick in the server. As Blob began making moves around the city, Scion quickly came to the conclusion that the creature had to be stopped from gaining power at all costs. Now, I don't mean Scion's character thought that. Scion the player seemed to find Blob extremely threatening, and he would find increasingly contrived reasons to have his character show up in nearly every scene where Blob reared his ugly head, shutting down my plans at every opportunity. If Blob did anything villainous, Scion's character would just so happen to coincidentally be in the area going shopping or something and attack him. Needless to say, having one of the most powerful sidekicks on the server constantly disrupting my plans was very effective at slowing down any story progression I wanted to do. Scion also argued with me constantly during RP, taking things out of character nearly every time my character did anything that would have negatively affected his own character in the slightest. Blob wanted to dig under the dirt to get past the telekinetic barrier Scion was projecting. Scion would argue that the ground was too hard and even tried to get mods on his side until I just relented. Blob wanted to take a swing at Scion while he was flying overhead in a subway tunnel. Cue an argument about how ceiling heights would prevent him from doing that. Blob wanted to use his whisper attack to make Scion dizzy. Scion argued that he was resistant to psychic attacks until I had to open my character sheet to prove the attack was purely sonic. He then went on to boast that he would eventually become completely immune to psychic attacks anyway. Despite this, Scion noticeably never once attempted to use any of his telepathic abilities on Blob, presumably afraid of mind leaking to an Eldritch Horror. Which was smart on his part, except that he only knew Blob was an Eldritch Horror at all because he'd read my character sheet. The arguing was so relentless that I started preemptively making my case OOC whenever I had Blob do anything in Scion's general vicinity. Now at this point, I feel like I need to clarify some things about how I played Blob. The server had no dedicated DMs, and instead, members would shift back and forth between player and DM roles as scenes demanded, often playing both at once. So, as I was one of the more experienced role players and also one of the few playing a villain, I was the one usually doing the DMing. While I had some story goals for Blob, the main thing I was trying to do with him was provide fun encounters for heroic players to deal with. So, even though my character was regularly getting into fights with other player characters, I wasn't actually out to get anyone. I definitely wasn't interested in one-upmanship, which is why it was so strange to me that Scion got so invested in stopping Blob's power progression. I wouldn't have minded it if he had actually wanted to set up an in-character rivalry. Blob and Scion could have made great arch-nemeses to each other, but instead he'd just have his character accidentally on purpose continuously foil Blob's plans without bothering to directly investigate them. The worst of Scion's antics was the fossil incident. Blob was growing curious about his own origins, knowing little beyond that he had been created in a laboratory in the local university before the scientists that made him attempted to incinerate him and flushed him into the sewers. He learned that an enigmatic fossil, secretly a fragment of an alien ooze monster connected to his creation, was being held in the university library, and he wanted it for himself to study. Making an alliance with another villain player's gang of mind-controlled drug addicts, he staged an attack on the university. The gang would distract the security upstairs while Blob would burst up through the university basement to seek the fossil. We coordinated this with a few hero players who would show up in an attempt to thwart us. Naturally, Scion wanted to join the hero side and we allowed it. How did Scion's character end up at the university, you ask? Well, perhaps a student there or listening in on the public broadcast nearby, or like some of the other heroes? No. Scion was just there, in the university, not for classes or anything, just hanging out. Okay, anyway, fighting. Most of the gang was upstairs, causing havoc to draw out the campus security and slow the heroes, while a few thugs provided backup in the basement, helping Blob look for the fossil. Scion, of course, made a beeline directly for the basement. By then, one of the gangsters had found the fossil among a bunch of other ordinary fossils. Scion, who in character still had no idea what was going on, saw a random gangster holding a random rock of no obvious significance. He bravely ignored the violent goons and hideous slime beasts threatening the civilians in the basement, telekinetically yoinked said random rock out of the gangster's hand, and promptly flew off into the sky with it. And I mean, yeah. With no way for Blob to pursue him, that rather effectively ended the event. Cyan's character had no way of knowing what the fossil was, or even that it had any particular importance whatsoever. He'd seen a random guy holding a random rock and decided that the most important thing for him to do in that moment was to take the rock and run. Out of character, Cyan the player didn't even really know what the fossil was either. He just knew that Blob wanted it for some reason, and that meant that he could not be allowed to have it. He had also very carefully avoided directly touching what was, as far as his character was aware, a completely random rock. And yes, I was going to have something happen if a psychic touched the Eldritch Alien Space Rock, probably some confusing visions, but he had no way of knowing that in character or out of character. God forbid anything interesting ever happened to Cyan's precious character. Well, this fossil had suddenly become much more important than I had originally planned. Now that it was in the hands of a hero, I asked Cyan what he had planned to do with it, and he said he would return it to the university once the situation had cooled down. Alright, I set out to do a proper write-up of the fossil for mod approval. If it was going to be coming up more, I detailed its history, the various effects it might cause depending on how it was interacted with, and clarified that it was extremely durable, as it was basically highly condensed carbon, meaning that outright destroying it would be very difficult. I posted my write-up, and the mods okayed it. Cool. I started plotting ways to further incorporate the fossil into my plans, working how it could ultimately put Blob on a crash course with his own origins. Upon seeing the post, Cyan immediately announced that he'd destroyed the fossil. I was surprised. I argued with him that he'd already said he'd be returning the fossil to the university and that this was blatantly metagaming. I also mentioned that the fossil would take quite a bit of effort to destroy, but no. Upon seeing out of character that the fossil was more significant than he'd realized, Cyan had decided there was no way Blob could ever be allowed to have it, and he used all his power to annihilate this random piece of university property. He hadn't even tried to interact with it in any way in character. It was just gone. There's nothing I could do about it, and this was far too petty to get a mod involved over, so I decided to say screw it and be a little petty myself. Cyan may have destroyed one fossil fragment, but I decided there would be more, and I kept the information to myself this time. From then on, I stopped being so generous about allowing Cyan to show up in scenes I was running. I also attempted to have Blob develop some psychic defenses of his own, as he'd been getting regularly harassed by a powerful psychic for weeks now, and wanted to better protect himself. The mods declared that was too powerful, and denied it. Cool. Well, that was the end of Blob Part 2, The Trials of Blob. I just remembered what it was called. That was the end of Part 2. Let's see. I mean, we've all dealt with metagaming players there in the past. I mean, everybody knows that. One thing that I don't understand is, like, the mods could easily, I mean, if they even cared to look, obviously he said he didn't get them involved in it, but if the mods had, cared to look at all, they would see just the blatant metagaming and OP-ness of Cyan. I guess, I mean, in my opinion, it's just sort of like they don't let Blob have a little bit of psychic defense because that's too powerful, but they let this random psychic character have the power to just, destroy things if they wanted to. Especially, and it's always just knowing when things are dangerous or not. I mean, like, genuinely, like, how would he, I guess, like, it makes sense. I could see in, like, a superhero, like, movie or just, like, a regular comic, like, somebody showing up to a spot where there's, like, oh, okay, they're holding a rock, I'll take that as a haha, I'm here, let me steal this rock from you. I could see that happening, but also just, like, grabbing it and running away while people are just, being murked in the basement of the university building. And also in just other places around the university. I don't know, I just don't see why why it would be okay, like, the mods would just allow Cyan to just, like, get away with knowing that. I mean, I feel like that should be some demerit on his hero points, or, if they track that at all, because it's not very heroic to just steal a rock from a brainwashed, hive-minded, drugged gang member, and then just leave all the civilians there to just die just because you saw him holding a rock. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know. I don't think it's very heroic. Good on OP for keeping the other information to himself towards the end there. That'll be interesting to see how that goes. But, this was kind of a shorter one, so let's go ahead and I'll actually add part 3 to this, which we'll go ahead and go right now. In this episode, we take a break from players trying to metagame Blob to death in favor of a different flavor of weird. We also get reminded that Blob is, in fact, a bad guy. The next problem player, or more fairly cringe player, Blob ran into was a weeaboo edgelady I'll call Shadowcaster. Unlike Gunslinger and Cyan, Shadowcaster wasn't out to kill Blob. In fact, she was immediately fascinated by him. So much so that soon after I joined the server, she wanted to make a female of his species. She posted a character concept for approval, complete with an image of a big-breasted slime woman. Oh no! Oh no, I don't want to read this one. Entirely without consulting me first. The thing was, Blob as an entire species were supposed to be completely asexual. They reproduced by budding and had no concept of gender. The only reason Blob went by he was because he'd seen the humans use pronouns and was mimicking them without entirely understanding what they meant. Also, I was absolutely not going to play a character with even the slightest hint of hentai potential on a server full of teenagers. Unfortunately, at that point, the mods still hadn't gotten around to approving Blob's species yet. Yes, I had to approve the species separately from the character, that's how micromanagey this server was. So all I could do was beg Shadowcaster to take her character request down so she didn't screw up my own character's lore. Fortunately, she agreed. Shadowcaster was the kind of player who was all about the aesthetics and edginess without the sour attitude. Her characters were beautiful, slender, pale women with black hair and dark clothes and powers of darkness who ended up bleeding a lot. I don't think they were vampires, but they were definitely Japanese. However, in personality she was bubbly and sociable, and all her characters were thoroughly heroic. She was astoundingly oblivious. Now, I don't want to be mean. Shadowcaster seemed like a nice, albeit weird girl, but dear lord, she had zero reading comprehension and would constantly be asking what was happening during roleplay, forcing me to stop and summarize for her OOC all the things I had just written. Like, the girl could have just scrolled up one post to get the same information. It was more funny than an actual problem, but this, combined with other nonsensical things that she did, made her something of a force of gothy chaos on the server. An example of the kind of thing Shadowcaster would get up to, after an RP encounter with Blob, her character accidentally left behind a blood bag filled with her own blood for Blob to drink. I had never at any point suggested that Blob drank blood, especially not blood found in random bags left on the ground. I can only assume that for some inexplicable reason, Shadowcaster thought Blob would see the blood bag and immediately go all Capri Sun on that bad boy. I don't know what would have happened if he'd drunk the blood bag, and I don't really want to know, I just have no idea what the heck that was about. Shadowcaster showed an interest in having her character befriend Blob, and at that point Blob needed all the friends he could get. She had first encountered Blob earlier while Blob was going on a rampage downtown. One of the people Blob had abducted had managed to escape from the creature's lair, and he was chasing them through the streets in a panicked rage, smashing past cars and shattering storefronts. Shadowcaster, along with several other heroes, battled the creature in the park to keep him away from his victim, with Shadowcaster personally body blocking one of Blob's charge attacks, keeping the man safe. Then, because this was before I'd stopped playing with Scion swooped in and levitated the victim away to safety. He'd been in the area, obviously. Shadowcaster was intrigued by the strange ooze monster and arranged to meet him, descending down into the Undercity. Blob was distraught over having lost one of his victims, and I played up his deranged obsession. Having him lay meant that he just wanted to talk to the man, and this was where Shadowcaster's obliviousness quite unintentionally turned Blob into a villainous mastermind. Because she, who again was playing a hero, agreed to extract Blob's victim from the hospital, where he was recovering from his ordeal, and bring him to the creature. This was a weird moment for me. You see, I'd decided that one of Blob's weaknesses was friendship. No joke. He was supposed to be so desperately lonely that someone just being nice to him could start pushing him away from villainy, disrupting his schemes, and that's exactly what Shadowcaster was doing. Unfortunately, she was completely falling for his delusions, so instead of the heroine bringing the villain closer to the light, the villain was tricking the heroine deeper into the darkness. The two of them concocted a plan, and I hoped that somewhere along the line, with enough blatant hints dropped that this was clearly a psychotic supervillain that should not be trusted, Shadowcaster would eventually figure out that this was a bad idea. Shadowcaster absolutely did not figure it out. She even went so far as to have her, again, heroic character punch out a hospital security guard as she escorted the confused abductee out onto the street. What followed was one of the most horrifying things I had ever had to write out. as the hideous slime monster burst out from an abandoned subway access hatch, engulfed his Homer victim, and dragged the man, screaming and pleading, back underground. His cries for help only ceasing when the horrid ooze closed over his mouth. Up until then, Shadowcaster had honestly believed that Blob just wanted to talk. I needed to take a moment after that, as I'd actually disturbed myself a little with how screwed up it was. It was fantastic RP, I just wish I hadn't felt like I had hoodwinked another player to pull it off. Hey, sometimes when you're playing a villain, you gotta be a little despicable. Shadowcaster continued being friends with Blob after that somehow. Shadowcaster also was talking to a bit OOC. At one point, she DM'd me a photo of her imaginary friend. It was a picture of her leg and a bit of empty floor. She insisted there was a girl standing there and asked me if I could see her too. I could not see her, no. Later, Shadowcaster shared with me a depiction of the girl she claimed she was seeing, an image which she had made using a character creation program she found online. She was a pale, black-haired, black-clothed lady that would have fit very comfortably in Shadowcaster's catalog of edgy anime OCs. From what I know of Shadowcaster, I don't believe she was actually hallucinating. I think she was pretending to because she thought it was edgy and cool. Once again, I just have no idea what the heck. This server was wild. I mean, it sounds pretty wild to me. Well, I mean, how do I feel about the second one? I was worried that it was gonna go. I was worried it was gonna go Bell on us with a little bit of carving some chests open and writing some names on there, some words. I was worried it was gonna go that way, but it was a little bit more PG this time. A little strange, but at least it wasn't too bad. Just a reminder: if you are hallucinating, random pale women. Probably go to the doctor or, a psychologist or something. Unless you're just making it up to be cool, that's fair too. Can we just talk about, how kind of fucked up it was that she kidnapped a man from the hospital and delivered him to a blob monster? And, the entire time it was, he was screaming and begging, you just kind of watch and smile, yeah, go talk to your new friend. Yeah, it's going well. What I said in the first one about losing some hero points, I feel like they should keep track of that, and eventually, have you not be a hero anymore. Or at least not trusted by the other heroes, because that's definitely something. If I was a hero on the server and I saw somebody doing that, I might not trust Shadowcaster to be quite the, hero anymore. I might not allow them to hang out with me at the hero club table. That might just be me, though. I mean... My God, that was kind of a messed up bit of a story there. I didn't go as bad as I thought it was going to go, like I said, but I thought it was going to go a lot worse. And it went kind of dark there, but, not too bad. I can still put this in the YouTube video. That's really all there is to say. You heard the story. I talked about it a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. If you, enjoyed it, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, let me know that too, and I'll, do better, I guess. If you can't think of anything you want to comment on your own, just let me know if you would drink the blood bag. Some people would, some people wouldn't. I probably wouldn't personally, but, if you would drink the edgy anime girl blood, let me know. But that's about it for me. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.